There's a particular kind of silence that follows catastrophic mistakes, the hollow quiet before consequences arrive with official letterhead and federal jurisdiction. My name is Jolly Reeves, and I've been a senior auditor at Audit Technologies for 7 years. 7 years of tracing transactions through labyrinthine accounting systems, 7 years of flagging discrepancies others pretended not to see, 7 years of being the person management calls when accuracy matters more than convenient narratives. My workspace occupies a corner office with glass walls, positioned where I observe the entire audit department without drawing attention. The view has taught me that corporate hierarchies operate on performance theater more than actual competence. Director Claudia Westbrook entered my office on a Tuesday morning without knocking, an act of casual dominance she'd perfected through years of believing her title justified rudeness. She wore expensive tailoring and an expression that blended impatience with dismissal, the signature look of executives who mistake authority for intelligence. "Jolly, I'm reassigning the Silverton Industries file." Her manicured nails tapped against my doorframe in rhythmic condescension. "You're too cautious for this engagement. We need someone who understands strategic flexibility in compliance interpretation." I glanced up from the audit file spread across my desk, a tangled mess of revenue recognition irregularities that had been triggering alarm bells in my professional instincts for 3 consecutive weeks. The numbers told a story Audit Technologies desperately didn't want documented. Strategic flexibility? I kept my tone neutral, professional. "Claudia, this file contains at least 5 material misstatements requiring immediate correction before quarterly filing. The timing discrepancies alone could trigger." She interrupted with a dismissive hand gesture. "That's your fundamental problem, Reeves. You manufacture catastrophes from minor technicalities." Audit Technologies didn't achieve market dominance by cowering before hypothetical regulatory concerns. The smugness saturating her voice could have filled an auditorium. She adjusted her designer blazer, probably worth more than my car payment, and delivered that particular smile executives use when convinced they've won arguments through rank rather than logic. "Who takes over the file?" I already knew. Vanessa Sterling. She grasps the nuances of outcome-oriented auditing. Translation: Vanessa would approve anything that protected executive bonuses and maintained stock valuations. I leaned back, fingers steepled, observing Claudia with the calm that comes from extensive preparation. 7 years studying corporate behavior patterns had taught me that people like Claudia Westbrook operate on predictable cycles. They confuse short-term victories with sustainable strategy. They mistake compliance with competence. And critically, they never read the documentation footnotes. "I'll transfer all materials to Vanessa by close of business," I said quietly. Claudia's eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised by my immediate capitulation. She'd anticipated resistance, wounded pride, some dramatic defense of professional territory. Instead, I gave her exactly what she thought she wanted: seamless compliance. "Excellent." She turned toward the door, paused at the threshold. "Perhaps this teaches you that auditing serves business objectives, Jolly. Not the reverse." The door clicked shut, punctuating her philosophy, a worldview destined to age like fruit left in summer heat. I sat motionless for exactly 3 minutes, absorbing the ambient keyboard sounds and muted phone conversations filtering through office walls. Then I opened my secure email and drafted the most consequential communication of my career. Being cautious, being the auditor who actually reads every footnote, traces every transaction to source documents, and maintains contemporaneous records of every conversation, develops a particular institutional memory. You notice patterns. Irregularities existing in spaces between official reports and actual practice. 3 months prior, I'd submitted detailed concerns about Audit Technologies' revenue recognition practices to the Internal Compliance Committee. My memorandum had been comprehensive, referenced, supported by specific transaction examples. It had also been quietly buried by Claudia, who'd assured the committee I was being unnecessarily conservative and that she would personally monitor any required adjustments. She'd monitored precisely nothing. I retrieved that original memorandum now, along with 17 supplemental documents I'd continued compiling despite Claudia's dismissal of my concerns. Call it professional paranoia. Call it compulsive documentation. Call it whatever helps you rationalize ignoring warnings when disaster approaches and leadership is too busy polishing their credentials to check navigation charts. My email to the Financial Oversight Review Board was succinct. Professional. Meticulously referenced. I outlined the concern timeline, specific regulatory violations identified, internal communications documenting my attempts addressing issues through proper channels, and the ultimate reassignment specifically because I wouldn't overlook material violations. I avoided editorializing. Facts spoke with sufficient volume. Then I copied the regional regulatory authority on the message, along with our external audit firm Whitfield and Associates. Not as primary recipients, that would appear too aggressive, too obviously retaliatory. Just courtesy copies, the professional loop closing any diligent senior auditor might reasonably execute when removed from a significant engagement. The send button clicked with satisfying finality. I began transferring audit files to Vanessa Sterling, complete with detailed handover documentation recording every concern, every unresolved question, every thread requiring investigation. Professional courtesy demanded thoroughness. If Vanessa chose ignoring those notes, that became her professionally documented choice. Office operations continued with typical Tuesday rhythm. Claudia conducted her weekly status meeting, performing her favorite monologue about driving results and strategic thinking. Vanessa accepted the Silverton file with visible enthusiasm, clearly viewing this as her opportunity proving indispensability to leadership. The finance team continued their elaborate dance moving numbers between columns in ways technically complying with form while violating spirit. I worked quietly, maintaining normal routines with the calm that comes from knowing you've already played your only move. Chess players call it a quiet move, a piece repositioned not for immediate impact, but to control the board 3 turns later. Day 1 passed uneventfully. Day 2 brought an email from Vanessa asking if I'd actually meant flagging all these items in my handover notes, or if I was perhaps being excessively detailed. I replied with professional warmth that yes, I'd meant every flag, and thorough documentation protects both auditor and organization. She didn't respond. Day 3 started normally. Break room coffee tasting like it had been brewed during the previous administration. Morning emails about meeting schedules and updated training modules. The comfortable monotony of corporate existence. Then, at 10:47 a.m., Claudia's office door burst open with sufficient force to make several people glance up from their screens. She crossed the audit department floor like an approaching storm system, her expression oscillating between panic and fury. Her designer composure had fractured completely, revealing wild-eyed desperation of someone watching their carefully constructed narrative collapse in real time. Jolly. My name emerged strangled. My office. Immediately. I saved my work with deliberate calm, stood, smoothed my blazer, and followed her across the floor. Every eye tracked our movement. The office grapevine would flourish within minutes. Claudia's office resembled a paper explosion. Documents covered every surface. Her computer displayed what appeared to be an extremely official email bearing a government seal. Her hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward chairs across from her desk. Why did the regulators show up unannounced in my office? The question emerged as both accusation and plea. Why are they asking specifically about the Silverton file? Why do they possess copies of internal memoranda I've never seen? I settled into the chair with practiced composure, folding my hands in my lap. I assumed they're conducting routine compliance review. Routine? Her voice climbed an octave. They have a comprehensive file, Jolly. Dates, transaction details, communications logs. They asked me why I reassigned you from the Silverton audit. They asked specifically about revenue recognition practices and whether I'd received warnings about potential violations. What did you tell them? I told them. She faltered, recognizing too late that any answer would incriminate her. Admitting she'd received warnings documented her negligence. Denying them constituted lying to federal regulators. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Claudia, I said gently, I provided the Oversight Review Board with a summary of my concerns about Autumn Technologies' accounting practices 3 days ago. When you reassigned the audit file, I felt professionally and legally obligated ensuring those concerns were properly documented with appropriate oversight bodies. I copied you on that email. You copied me. She lunged toward her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard, searching her inbox with increasing desperation. When? What email? Tuesday. 5:47 p.m. Subject line, documentation of outstanding compliance concerns Silverton Industries audit. Her face went ashen as she located it, buried in an inbox she clearly hadn't checked carefully since my reassignment. She'd been too busy celebrating her victory to notice the trap closing. You went to the regulators. Not a question. An accusation wrapped in disbelief. I went to the Compliance Oversight Board, which is standard protocol when an auditor identifies material concerns and those concerns aren't adequately addressed through internal channels. The fact that the regional regulatory authority was copied, also standard protocol, and chose initiating an inquiry suggests they found the documented concerns credible. Claudia stared at me like I'd just spoken in lost languages. You sabotaged me. I documented compliance violations and followed proper escalation procedures. My voice remained level, professional. Which is literally my job description. Your job description is supporting this organization. My job description is ensuring this organization complies with financial reporting regulations. When you reassigned me for being too cautious, you removed the person preventing Autumn Technologies from filing materially false quarterly statements. Vanessa approved the Silverton revenue recognition yesterday. That filing is now with the SEC, containing at least 5 violations I specifically documented. The color drained from her face completely as implications cascaded. A false filing. Her signature on the audit approval. Her documented dismissal of concerns. Her explicit reassignment of the auditor who'd raised flags. The regulators are reviewing every major file I've overseen in the past 2 years. Her voice had gone hollow. They're interviewing the entire audit team. They asked if I have personal legal counsel. I stood, smoothing my blazer. You should probably retain one. A competent one. You destroyed my career. The words emerged barely above a whisper. No, Claudia. You destroyed your career when you decided facilitating business objectives mattered more than accurate financial reporting. I just ensured there was a comprehensive paper trail documenting that choice. I walked to the door, then paused with my hand on the handle, a mirror of her theatrical exit from my office 3 days earlier. For what it's worth, I said quietly, I attempted handling this internally. Multiple times. You dismissed every concern, buried every memorandum, and ultimately removed me from the audit specifically because I wouldn't overlook material violations. You didn't just make a mistake, Claudia. You made a pattern of mistakes, and you documented that pattern through your own emails and decisions. Her desk phone began ringing. The caller ID displayed the CEO's extension. You should probably answer that, I suggested. I suspect they've received inquiries from our external audit partners about why our internal controls failed so spectacularly. I left her office and returned to my desk, where a small crowd had subtly formed in the break room area, everyone pretending to refresh coffee while obviously watching the drama unfold. Whispers followed my path. The office grapevine was already heavy with speculation. My email pinged. A message from the CEO's office requesting my presence for a meeting at 2 p.m. along with our general counsel and the head of internal audit. The subject line read, Silverton Industries Regulatory Inquiry, your cooperation requested. I replied confirming attendance and began preparing my files. Everything was already organized, naturally. Chronologically sorted, cross-referenced, backed up in 3 separate secure locations. When you're the cautious one, you develop habits. The afternoon meeting lasted 3 hours. I walked them through the timeline methodically, my initial concerns, my escalation through proper channels, the documented dismissals, the reassignment, my final compliance filing. I provided copies of everything, including communications I'd maintained outside the corporate email system as a precaution against selective deletion. The general counsel asked if I'd been pressured to alter my findings. I confirmed I had been, and provided documentation. The head of internal audit asked why I hadn't approached her directly. I pulled up the email I'd sent her 6 weeks ago, the one she'd forwarded to Claudia with a note saying please handle, and watched her face change colors. The CEO, a silver-haired man named Frederick Langford who usually communicated exclusively through delegated subordinates, studied me with something approaching respect mixed with calculation. Ms. Reeves, he said carefully, your actions may have prevented significant legal exposure for Autumn Technologies. They also precipitated a regulatory inquiry that will be costly and disruptive. I'm uncertain whether to thank you or terminate you. With respect, Mr. Langford, the regulatory inquiry was inevitable. The violations existed independent of my reporting. I merely ensured they were discovered through proper compliance channels rather than through catastrophic failure during an SEC investigation. The first scenario is survivable with corrective action. The second scenario ends in criminal charges and organizational collapse. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled an unconscious mirror of my own habitual gesture. What would you recommend as next steps? Full forensic review of all audits Claudia Westbrook supervised in the past 24 months. Immediate retention of specialized counsel for regulatory response. Voluntary disclosure of any additional violations discovered before regulators find them independently. And a comprehensive review of how internal compliance escalations are handled, because multiple people failed to act on documented concerns. Including you? The question came from the general counsel, sharp and probing. My failure was assuming that following internal channels would result in action. I corrected that failure by escalating externally when internal mechanisms proved inadequate. I accept responsibility for not moving faster, but the systemic failure here extends far beyond any individual auditor. The meeting concluded with carefully worded appreciation for my cooperation and a directive to make myself available for ongoing inquiries. I was neither terminated nor explicitly thanked. Corporate limbo, where most truths reside. Over the following weeks, the situation unfolded with slow-motion inevitability of an avalanche. The regulatory inquiry expanded. Claudia Westbrook was placed on administrative leave, then quietly resigned before formal termination could stain her record further. Vanessa Sterling, who'd approved the problematic filing, was reassigned to internal projects pending review. The forensic audit uncovered 18 separate violations across multiple client files, ranging from minor timing discrepancies to significant revenue manipulation. Autumn Technologies settled with regulators for a substantial fine and agreed to enhanced oversight procedures. Several executives departed. Frederick Langford survived, barely, by demonstrating he'd been systematically misled by his audit director. My role evolved. I was promoted to interim director of audit operations with a mandate to rebuild the department's credibility. The irony wasn't lost on me, the person deemed too cautious now charged with establishing standards for the entire organization. I instituted mandatory training on escalation procedures. Created anonymous reporting channels that bypassed direct supervisors. Established regular compliance reviews with external oversight. Made it clear through policy and practice that raising concerns would be viewed as professional excellence, not organizational disloyalty. The office culture shifted slowly, like an enormous ship adjusting course. People began flagging issues earlier, asking questions more freely, pushing back when pressured to overlook irregularities. The transformation wasn't dramatic or immediate, but it was genuine. 6 months after that Tuesday morning when Claudia reassigned my audit file, I received an email from the Regional Regulatory Authority. A commendation for professional integrity and adherence to proper escalation protocols. It came with no financial reward, no public recognition, just a formal letter acknowledging that I'd done my job correctly when doing so carried personal and professional risk. I printed it and filed it away in my desk drawer, next to my collection of previous documentation. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Sometimes being cautious means seeing disasters before they happen. Sometimes it means being dismissed as paranoid, overly careful, unable to see the bigger picture. And sometimes, when you've documented everything carefully enough, it means being the person who's still standing when the dust settles and everyone wants to know why nobody saw this coming. I saw it coming. I said so. Repeatedly. In writing. That's what cautious means. On a Thursday afternoon 9 months after everything unraveled, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code triggered recognition, the same region as our former director's last known residence. Jolly Reeves, I answered professionally. It's Claudia. The voice sounded diminished somehow, stripped of its former arrogance. I needed to call. Silence stretched between us across hundreds of miles. I'm working as a consultant now, she continued. Compliance advisory, ironically. Helping companies avoid the mistakes I made. My legal counsel suggested it would be beneficial for my rehabilitation narrative. That sounds appropriate, I said neutrally. I wanted to say. She faltered, searching for words. You were right. About everything. And I was so focused on short-term victories that I couldn't see how catastrophically wrong I was until it all collapsed. I destroyed my own career. You just documented it. Yes, I agreed simply. No need to elaborate. Do you hate me? The question surprised me with its vulnerability. I considered it honestly. No, I said finally. I don't hate you, Claudia. I just refuse to participate in your decisions. There's a difference. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. It's not meant to make you feel anything. It's just the truth. She laughed, a bitter sound. You really are exactly who you appear to be, aren't you? No hidden agenda, no elaborate revenge fantasy. Just a person who does their job correctly and documents everything. That's all I've ever been. It's terrifying, she said quietly. People like you. Because there's no negotiating, no compromising, no finding the angle. Just competence and standards and consequences. The consequences came from your choices, not my documentation. I know. A long pause. I'm sorry. For what it's worth. I'm sorry I dismissed you, undermined you, and tried to make your integrity seem like weakness. I accept your apology, I said, and meant it. I hope your consulting work goes well, Claudia. Genuinely. Thank you. She sounded surprised. Why would you wish me well after everything? Because people can learn from mistakes and do better. Because holding grudges serves no purpose. And because the goal was never to destroy you, it was to stop the violations and protect the organization. You just happened to be the person standing between those objectives. She ended the call shortly after, and I returned to my quarterly reports. The numbers aligned correctly now, transparent and defensible. The kind of boring, accurate financial reporting that lets organizations function without regulatory crisis. Some people mistake excitement for excellence, drama for importance. They chase the adrenaline of deadline miracles and last-minute saves, treating compliance as obstacles to overcome rather than standards to maintain. I prefer boring. Boring means the systems work. Boring means nobody's scrambling to explain material misstatements to federal regulators. Boring means the organization survives to operate another quarter, another year, another decade. That evening, I left the office at exactly 5:30 p.m. No crisis demanded overtime. No regulatory emergency required immediate attention. Just a normal Wednesday evening at a functional organization with proper controls. The sunset painted the parking lot in shades of amber and gold, autumn colors for autumn technologies. I drove home listening to a podcast about obscure accounting controversies, because apparently my idea of relaxation involves more accounting. My apartment welcomed me with familiar quiet. I made dinner, reviewed some technical updates to revenue recognition standards, and settled in for an evening of peaceful solitude. Some people need their victories to be loud, celebrated, acknowledged by crowds. They want the dramatic confrontation, the public triumph, the moment when everyone recognizes they were right all along. I needed none of that. My victory was simple: I'd done my job correctly despite pressure to do otherwise, and the organization was better for it. Nobody would write songs about meticulous documentation and proper escalation procedures. No one would make inspirational posters about the heroism of reading footnotes. But somewhere in Autumn Technology's secure servers, there existed a comprehensive archive of properly executed audits, flagged concerns, and corrected violations. Invisible infrastructure supporting the visible business. The kind of quiet competence that prevents disasters rather than creating opportunities for dramatic rescue. Claudia Westbrook had called me too cautious, as if caution were weakness. She'd missed the essential truth: caution isn't fear of action. It's wisdom about consequences. It's the patient work of seeing disasters before they arrive and building barriers against them. It's understanding that some mistakes can't be fixed afterward, only prevented beforehand. And when prevention fails because leadership won't listen, caution means having documented everything carefully enough to survive the aftermath. I fell asleep that night with none of the dramatic satisfaction of traditional revenge. No triumphant confrontation. No public vindication. Just the quiet comfort of knowing I'd maintained my standards when abandoning them would have been easier, more profitable, and more popular. Sometimes the moral of the story isn't about the spectacular downfall of villains or the dramatic triumph of heroes. Sometimes it's simpler: do your job correctly. Document thoroughly. Follow proper procedures. And when someone powerful dismisses your concerns, make sure you've created a comprehensive paper trail explaining exactly why they're wrong. Because eventually, inevitably, reality asserts itself. Numbers don't lie. Regulations don't negotiate. And when the regulators show up unannounced asking uncomfortable questions, the person who was too cautious becomes the person who was exactly cautious enough. 3 days. That's how long it took for Claudia Westbrook's confidence to collapse into panic. 3 days between her smug reassignment and her desperate question about regulators. 3 days, and 7 years of careful preparation. They say pride comes before the fall. They don't mention that sometimes the fall is documented in triplicate with supporting exhibits and proper regulatory citations. I sleep better knowing I added that particular footnote to the story.